Mr. Begley, members of the board, we do have several items for board discussion this evening. The first is our book study. Pull it out. We are scheduled to discuss chapters 1 and 2 this evening, pages 1 through 55. And, I know once we get going, we're usually fine. Our prompts, I read, I noticed, I wondered. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Begley.
Yeah, sure. Who would like to start us out?
I will jump the gun on that one. Almost the third sentence in. As a 17-year-old kid, I lacked the social emotional skills and maturity to work through the slow point in my life. Quitting seemed to be the easiest way out, and they didn't try to dissuade me. That seems like a lot of students are in that realm right now in life, in this environment. Again, going back to the C word, I think that played a part in how kids feel and their emotional separation from society and social interaction has played a big part, I think, in that. Kids just seem to want to throw in the towel and not move forward as easily or with a nudge. Maybe sometimes we're too coddling to kids, I think, sometimes to just take, like this story where they just went up and took the jersey away without trying to talk to the child type thing. So that right off the bat stuck out to me. Then I highlighted just about the whole paragraph on the next page, the first top half there, which explains some of that. So, and what I was going to say is, they do, as teenagers lack those emotional skills. Even if we think they are mature enough, they're still developing. Their minds are still developing. Their bodies are still. There's a whole lot going on inside that I think society right now expects kids to be more mature, more emotionally able to handle life, and they cannot. And I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, thank you. I tend to agree. And, this book, Jimmy Cassis, he obviously spoke from the heart about his personal experience as an at-risk student who made it with the help of, I think it was Mr. Morgan.
Right.
And to your point, one of his lines on page 22, he saw in me more than I could see in myself. And I think a lot of young people lack confidence, lack emotional maturity, self-awareness, whatever it may be, right? And that's where a teacher, someone in the school district can make that difference.
Yeah.
And that's really what this book, at least so far, has been about. But what we were talking about earlier is you can't do that if they don't come to school.
Right.
Right? I think it's an excellent book, and there's so much that can be done, but if they're not there, if they won't engage. And I'll just keep going here. On page 45, it talks about address the barriers to a culture focused on championing for students. So how do these fundamental core elements, taking time to personally search out students, engage them in conversation, both meaningful and frivolous, and genuinely listen to them, so often goes ignored in our schools. And isn't that the role that our CSRs have taken on to a large degree, right? I mean, I think what it's saying there is teachers are busy, and it's the next class, and the assignments, and they've got to do this, and sometimes that gets lost, but that's a gap that our CSRs really fill in, because that's all they've got is time to a certain degree, right? And they become so relatable to the students. That's a wonderful function, a wonderful benefit of the SRO program. Am I saying that right? I don't think I said it right earlier.
SRO.
SRO.
Yeah,
You said CSR.
Sorry.
That's in my world.
I know.
We all knew
Customer service reps.
SROs.
We weren't
We
going
knew
to
what
say
you
it.
meant.
We're just letting him keep talking.
Let him talk.
I've made my point.
Well, to that point too, go back to page 6 where it says everybody's a leader, and I've heard Mr. Smith say this a lot. It doesn't matter if you're the superintendent or facilities, anything. You're a leader to these children. And you could be that one person that makes a difference in their life. Just saying hi to them, approaching them in the hallway. I think it was an SRO that said that at the last meeting, when he saw that young lady and thought there was an issue, and just approached her. It being something that,
Yeah.
there was no issue, but had he not
Right.
done that, he would have
Right.
probably thought about that ongoing. So that caring kindness, that's part of that. So, and everybody leads, everybody leads. Even the seniors lead to the sophomores, you know, in the building. So everybody's a leader in some way, shape, or form.
So true.
And I would add an influencer to that as well.
You can do that beyond social media?
For not to be.
Mrs. Gundrum, what'd you think?
I thought this was I mean, there was so much that I found interesting that like, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna mark this, and then it got to be too many things to mark.
I like the whole book.
Yeah, but, so, some of the things that stuck out, we may not get to decide which kids we serve, but we do get to decide the kind of climate in which we want to serve them. And that spoke to me personally because I, at one point early in my law career, or, a career as attorney, worked in the juvenile justice system. And oftentimes, I would get a call from a court and say, hey, we got a case for you. I'm not going to tell you anything about it right now, but you want to take it? And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. I didn't know what I was walking into. But I had to approach everything the same, as trying to do the best job I could for this child, whether it was as a guardian ad litem, as a defender, whatever it was. So, I had to bring my best to that child wherever that child was in their life. So that really spoke to me. And then on page 9, and this kind of goes back to when we were talking about the report card. Too often, however, we get stuck in the habit of simply managing a mediocre culture. Challenging the status quo can seem daunting and overwhelming. And like I was saying, I love that we can celebrate the progress and the stars that we have gotten, but we're always moving forward. What else can we do? How can we make this better? How do we get that next star? So I thought that was very relevant to tonight's conversation.
Absolutely.
And then, see, I marked so many things. On page 28, where he's talking about relationships, and he said that in his one of his mentors said to him, Jimmy, everyone has a savior, but it isn't always going to be you. Then after a brief pause, he would say, but it doesn't give you an excuse not to try. And again, like, I know in the work I did with kids, sometimes, you felt compelled to try to be their savior, try to talk some sense into them or help guide them or whatever. And I'm sure that teachers who teach these kids every day probably experience the same thing. And you're not going to be the savior for every kid, but you can try. And at least you know you did what you could. So I'm done rambling now.
That's good. That's good. Anyone from the administration?
Would you like to go, Mrs. Lang? Okay. I'll share two things, and both pretty early on. Page number 2 talks about halfway down the page, how critical it is to take time to talk to students and understand what they see, feel, and experience. I can honestly say that most of what I have learned from working with students has come from, you guessed it, talking with and listening to students. And we've talked about the importance of student voice, and our ELT invited students to be a part of that group a few years ago, and it just really was, it was really hard to believe, like, how much we learned from our kids. As adults, I think we sometimes think we know how things are for them based on our own observations, but to let them tell their story and how things have impacted them can really make a huge difference as we, talk about making decisions that will impact them directly. And if you think about it, why wouldn't we, listen to them because we're trying to serve them. But sometimes we feel like because of our own experiences, we know what's best, for them and what's the best way to serve them. But if we take the time to listen to them, we often will go a different direction. So I really appreciate that. And then the last thing I'll share is just an amazing story on page 12 and 13 about a student named Camden who was very angry and aggressive at school. And he says, a teacher said, though I've never had Camden as an actual student during the school year, I would always talk to him, and we even started staying after practice to work on football drills. Slowly, he began to smile, laugh, and show signs of compassion that were not apparent when I first met him. He became like my little brother and slowly became the amazing young man that was there the whole time. And the phrase that was there the whole time, that's what we have to remember as educators, is that sometimes we have students that give us a lot of grief, cause us a lot of stress. We feel like we can't reach them. But there's an amazing young man or woman that is there. It's there. There the whole time, and that came out because of the relationship that this young man had with a teacher, and sounds like a coach. And goes on to say, Camden told me that if it wasn't for me taking time to talk to him and mentor him, never giving up on him when he had his bad days, he would not have graduated and he wouldn't have gone to college. The teacher closes by saying, I didn't do anything exceptional. I just cared about a student when he needed it most. And that's why I say we will never be defined by our report card. As much as we have so much to celebrate, and we will continue to stretch to try to get that extra half star for next year. But it's really about the relationships, and it's really about caring about every single child, every day, in every classroom, and every building. So that story is really what it's all about.
Page 42 touches on that, Mr. Smith, and that's under listening to students. It's easy, though, to dismiss students' concerns about workloads or consequences as whining or complaining, but then it kind of says, look in the mirror. Let's be honest, sometimes we as adults are just likely to complain, and when we don't like something. The first lesson is recognize that while we tend to be hypocritical of what we perceive as selfish behavior in our students, we need to keep our own complaints in check if we want people to listen to us. So we just need to turn that around, look at them, and remember that champion inside of that student is in there.
Yes.
Yep.
Anything else? Are we good? Okay, we will move along. We will revisit this book again in February and then again in April. That will be after, obviously, the first of the year, and Mr. Napier will be joining the board then. So he's been given a copy, and he'll catch up and join us then. So looking forward to that. Thank you. It looks like a great book. Thanks for suggesting it. It'll be a good read.
All right, our next item for board discussion, Board of Education Professional Development. So I know Mrs. Lane had been working on a potential date for that session, which will be facilitated by Terry Morgan, the same individual who has worked with us on several occasions in the past, has done a really great job with us. So pending board approval tonight, our organizational meeting, again, pending approval, will be January 8th. Would like to have some discussion tonight to pinpoint a date for Ms. Morgan to come do some training with our board. So I'll throw a couple dates out there, and as I do, once I do, I'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of those dates. So January 8th is a possibility. We already have an organizational meeting scheduled that night. So if we do that, we would probably move some of the presentations that we have scheduled on that night. I know Mrs. Aug is looking for, I think she has a presentation that night, even referenced it this evening, but we would probably do that, and the board might even consider starting a little earlier. So we could do what we could to minimize the content on the agenda that evening, in order to make some space and time for the OSBA training. That's an option. Other options, January 24th, January 29th, January 30th, and February 1st. So what I would say about those dates, about those last several dates, we do have a board meeting already scheduled on February 1. So if we choose the 29th or the 30th, that means we would have 2 meetings in 1 week. So those are some things to consider. Again, I'll repeat those dates: January 8th, 24th, 29th, 30th, and February 1, knowing that we already have, again, pending board approval for the 8th, and February 1. Again, that would also be pending board approval, but based on how we've done things in the past, we would probably have a meeting on February 1st. So, and now I will leave it to the board to have some discussion about those potential dates.
Was January 8th not suitable for the board members?
Oh, January 8th, we're meeting already for sure.
Okay.
It's whether or not we combine the two.
The two together, I got you.
Yeah, yeah. So that was the 24th, the 29th, the 30th. Were those bad dates for you?
24th is not good for me. The 29th I could probably make work.
Mrs. Gundram, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I could do any of those days. I'd say the 24th is the least preferred,
Okay.
but,
Well, it's 2 against the 24th, so that's probably not where we're headed.
Okay?
So then, Mr. Napier, from the back of the room, do you have a thought? Do you have a preference for the 8th or the?
I'm retired and won't be golfing next week.
No, I don't think you will. So then we're looking at the 29th or the 30th, or we're doing it all on the 8th. Is there a preference there?
Or there, or there.
yeah, I mean, the 8th or the, February 1st was also an option.
It
February
is.
1st is the next board meeting.
Yeah.
And so that also has a board meeting attached to that date.
Yeah.
January 8th and February 1st. Yes.
Our board meetings already.
Either one of those, I think, makes sense if we're already here, might as well.
Okay, yeah, if we pulled out presentations, in theory, it could be, Mr. Napier?
February 1st, we get be at least a month to get my feet wet.
Well, February 1st, I think the thought there is February 1st is a regular board meeting, right?
If you said it at your organizational meeting.
If we set it
Yes.
at the organizational meeting on the 8th,
And the 8th is would be your first meeting.
yeah.
Right.
And I think this is a good, as you're getting started, to do this right away. So I'd rather see it sooner than later.
Okay.
And it's just a matter of picking a date. You know, our last board meeting was 32 minutes or something.
Mhm.
If we don't have executive session, if we don't have presentations, we can still take care of the duties of the school board and then go into our meeting. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Good for you? All right.
Does the board have an opinion on starting a little bit earlier that evening, or would you like to keep the start time at 6:30 on that evening?
6 is fine. Early's fine.
Yeah, you wanna go at 6? Could you go at 6?
Yeah.
Should you go at 6, Mr. Napier?
You'd be all, hope that. Be done with 018 by then?
Change this.
Might be dark.
Agreeable, I like that.
6
All right, it sounds like 6 o'clock. Can we do that?
No, they're doing the 8th. Yeah, so we're getting some legal advice over here on the,
Just change the time.
Well,
They haven't approved it yet, so they can
they
change it.
haven't approved. it,
okay, so we can
it's
just, I can read it at
approved
6 o'clock. Okay, okay. All right, well, that was easier than I thought.
Easy enough,
Good
huh?
work. January 8th,
6.
6 o'clock start time,
And we'll be here, the community room.
and I'll work on rescheduling some presentations. Okay. All right, our next item for board discussion, board policies. I'll turn over to Dr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Bagley, and members of the board. Under items for board discussion, letter C, board policy number 3, I have 8 pieces of policy for discussion, letters A through H. In your board packet, I have included a copy of previous language and the proposed language as per OSBA for you to take a look-see at those policies. Letter A, policy EBCD, and letter B, EBCDR. Those both deal with emergency closings. Those are revisions. This is another piece of policy coming out of House Bill 33. This states the board must adopt a plan to provide instruction via online delivery to make up hours in that school year for which it is necessary to close schools for a long list of reasons, and I won't list all those reasons. This is if we go above and beyond our allowable days if we've not met hours. This essentially replaces, if you remember the term, blizzard bags from a couple of years ago. That's what this policy is about. Letters C and D, policy IGCF, and regulation IGCF. This is home education. Again, coming from House Bill 33, we must now refer to those students who are homeschooled as receiving home education. Home education is defined as the education of a child between the ages of 6 and 18, directed by the child's parent. The new law provides that students receiving home education are exempt from compulsory attendance provisions. I think this part is interesting as well. Parents are still required to submit a notice to the superintendent of the child's district of residence informing the district that they will be providing home instruction, but parents are no longer required to provide any assurances about hours of instruction that the students will receive, information about the curriculum or textbooks, or annual academic assessments. So that's policy C, or letter C and D for our policies this evening.
Is there any guidance as why that was written that way?
If you want my opinion, this is all about the flavor of the month, which is parents' rights, right?
All right.
So allow the parents to decide and educate their children however they want.
Even well-intentioned, it doesn't sound right.
So, any other questions about any of this? Letter E, policy IIA, instructional materials revision, again from House Bill 33. This adds new requirements for reading instruction materials used for all students. These changes are centered around what Mr. Shorter talked about last week, or last meeting, the concept of the science of reading, which is defined under the new law as interdisciplinary, evidence-based approach to reading instruction. The newly created Department of Education and Workforce must establish a list of approved materials aligned to the science of reading. Our policy must be updated to also include in selecting instructional materials, the district complies with all state law requirements. So that's the change in that policy there. Letter F, policy IKE, promotion and retention of students. This is a revision. Again, from House Bill 33, we talked about this a little bit with the earlier presentation about the third grade reading guarantee. This allows students who would otherwise be retained in third grade to be promoted at their parents' requests. A student's parents, in consultation with the child's teacher and principal, can request that the child be promoted to fourth grade despite not reaching their requisite level of achievement in reading. While the retention requirement still exists, this effectively grants parents a choice as to whether their children are retained. Districts still have an obligation to assess and provide interventions to students that existed prior to this change. Students promoted to fourth grade under the new parent request provision are entitled to receive the intensive reading services and supports that are provided to students who are retained pursuant to that agreement. And then two more to go. Letter G, IL testing programs. This is another revision. New Ohio Revised Code requires notification of student scores on state assessments and or end of course exams administered to be provided to parents by June 30th of each year. Such notice may be provided by mail, email, or through posting of a score in a secure portal on the district or school's website. And lastly, this evening, letter H, JHCD, administering medications to students. This is another revision. Newly enacted Ohio Revised Code requires that the school nurse or another employee create an individualized seizure action plan for each student that has an active seizure disorder diagnosis in collaboration with the student's parents or guardian. This policy has been updated to reflect the requirement that districts designate at least one employee in each building to receive training in implementing individualized seizure action plans, including in administering seizure drugs to students with active seizure disorders. Please let me know if you have any questions. This concludes all the items I have for board discussion tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. Any thoughts, comments, concerns? Yeah, I guess just again, this is the problem with the state taking over education. We're trying to do what's in the best interest of the students, and what I heard there was what was in the best interest of the voters. My thoughts. Sorry, we'll move along.
All right, up next, we have Transportation MOU. Turn it over to Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Begley, members of the board. We have received a request from Fairfield Preparatory Academy to enter into a memorandum of understanding agreement for the district to provide transportation support if they experience an emergency that requires student reunification. We have a similar MOU understanding with the Butler County ESC preschools, but this is the first one we've received to actually provide transportation to another entity within the district. I have addressed this with Mr. Clemens, and we are currently working on language that would allow the district to be fully protected, but wanted to bring this to your attention because it is the first time we've received such a request.
Okay, sounds good.
And hopefully we'll never have to obviously utilize it, but just in case.
Yeah.
But thank you.
All right, our next item for board discussion, Fairfield Township Tax Increment Financing Tax Exemption Extensions. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Bagley, members of the board, the district received a notice from Fairfield Township on October 18th regarding the consideration for a vote on the extension of the current 30-year TIF that has been in place since June of 2001 with the township. Pursuant to amended House Bill 33 and Ohio Revised Code 5709.51, the township and the board have a limited opportunity to extend the original TIF exemption for an additional period of not more than 30 years. So it's the intention of the township to pay the school district all of the taxes that we would have otherwise received if this exemption were not authorized. In other words, the district will be made whole, held harmless. As Mr. Kalin referred in his presentation with the city guidelines, it's the same information that as with the township as far as being held harmless. So Mr. Clemens may share some additional details that we have about the request.
The township has indicated that this is the first of a number of these that they have in place, and that they would be proposing to extend them also. In light of that, and in light of the fact that the law requires that the school district be made whole, they have requested, and I think I would recommend to the board that we formalize the compensation in an agreement that will cover all of these future extensions, and also that we waive any notice that they would be required to give us to do that. What happens oftentimes is when they want to act, they're supposed to give us a 45-day prior notice. Well, that's a long time, and then we have to have a meeting, and then they have to act after us. And they're asking that we waive the notice on these extended TIFs, and I agree with that and would recommend it to the board for your consideration at your next meeting. You know, we are not waiving any notice with regard to new TIFs. So if they're granting new tax increment financing, we would still receive the notice, have our input, and could potentially object depending on the length and percentage. But for these existing ones, I really think it's beneficial to both parties to waive that notice procedure.
Thank you, Mr. Clemens.
And Mr. Clemens, you said there would be a new agreement drawn up, and that would be part of that agreement?
At your meeting on the 16th, yes, that would be part
Yeah.
of that agreement. We would waive the notice, and they would agree that for all of them, the district is made whole.
Yeah.
So,
Good, sounds good.
Much like the city, we've got a good working relationship with the township folks. I know a few people out there. Few. Mr. Birding's out there doing his level best, and I'm sure he's always cognizant of the school and doing what's right by the school district.